going on, everybody? Welcome to Jack Ramsays. Danny Marang, joined by Nathan Grubel of At No Ceilings. I have highlighted before that this season is going to be a little different, a little bit more draft-focused early on, just because that's what this season is going to be. So, without further ado, Nate, thank you for taking some time here early Saturday morning. For those that are wondering, why does Danny look like he just woke up? Because Danny just woke up. This is what happens. That is the nature of this beast. So hold on. I just had my freaking audio blown out, and you are not coming through. Let's try this again. There we go. You there? Well, you're not. Your audio's not coming through on my end. Oh, for the love of Pete! I hate OBS. It was everything literally just tested just fine for 20 minutes, and it's like, why would we work now? Let's try this one more time. Hello. There we go. Now you're
beautiful. You got to do that fun intro again now.
All right, there we go. Perfect. Welcome into Jack Ramsays. Danny Marang. It's a draft preview edition, the way too early, with Nathan Grubel of. You can go at No Ceilings on all across their social medias, but just from No Ceilings. Thanks for taking some time for us. It's this early morning. I guess it's in the afternoon for you on the East Coast now. But this is for the sickos, as you guys so often say over at No Ceilings. You guys know I've brought over a couple of guys both on the radio and here on the podcast, and we will do this periodically throughout the year. And Nathan has been kind enough to join us first here to give us a 30,000-foot view down on in of, hey, the Blazers are probably going to be in the top 5 of the lottery. Who should they be looking at? Yes, Cooper Flagg, but who else and why? So
it's not quite sicko season yet, boss. I will say when we get to about mid to late April and I start texting agents and some of my friends about some obscure international names that they've never even heard of, that's when we know we're going to be in sicko season. So, but buckle up, it's going to be a fun ride.
Okay, real quick, how deep does when you get into the thick of the weeds, how deep does your draft board go?
It goes incredibly deep, and it kind of has to, right? Because we've seen enough cases over the years, these guys getting picked in the second round, undrafted guys, even players who go undrafted, they start their careers overseas, they come back over. Like you guys and Trailblazers fans know very well, Dwop Reith, someone who ultimately had to come back over to the NBA, and now look, he played good rotation minutes last year, was in contention for me for a potential all-rookie second team nomination. So it's like you find these players all over the place, but if you do your homework during the draft period, when these guys start popping on other radars, you have a reference point to be able to look back to in your evaluation and say, this is where they were at. This is how they've improved and developed. What can we learn from this? Is this real? And then do we have a chance to sign somebody like that in the NBA? So it's always important to do the homework, even if the guy isn't going to be one of the 60 picks on draft night or over the last few years, 58, 59. These teams got to stop getting their picks vacated. That's a different conversation for a different day.
Were we talking like 400 deep? Because I know some people out there that are in the 350, 400 deep on their board.
Not in terms of how many names actually make my board. Okay. Usually I ultimately settle in around like the 110 to 150 mark.
Okay.
Because there gets to a certain point where you look at this guy and you have to give a very objective answer quickly. Is this guy actually going to be an NBA player? Yeah. And if the answer is either a hard no or a maybe down the road, but not right now, he's got to go off the board. Because at the end of the, if you have to laser focus in on 110 to 150 guys, brother, you're keeping yourself busy for a very long time on synergy. So
yeah, I cheat and I never go past 100 because my brain
that's fair.
I'm too dumb. I can't. Like 100's good. Look, man, 100 is good right now. I don't.
At least we're in basketball, though. Imagine scouting for the NFL draft.
Yeah, no.
100 is like literally the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, it gets. It's tough. It's tough. All right. Let's kind of get into this. This is what I wanted to do this season is, hey, college basketball's around the corner. College basketball's back. For the love of God, I think in my top 30, I think I only ended up with 4 guys that are international prospects right now. I believe that ended up being the case. College basketball is loaded this year.
Mm-hmm.
maybe hasn't been for a couple of years. And now you're going to have a freshman class that is loaded to the gills. You'll have some upperclassmen that will garner some attention, but this class is very, very, very much about the freshmen that are incoming and what they can do, particularly at the top of the draft. When you sit down and you take a look at this class, and I don't want to beat the drum of how much better it is over last year's class, but kind of try to quantify, at least for you, the difference between the 2024 class and 2025 class and why it matters.
So obviously, we're going to talk about a number of prospects at the very top who have obvious star potential that players in the last class just simply did not have, at least from a pre-NBA evaluation standpoint. However, I'm also never going to be one person who is banging the drum for this is a terrible draft class. And the reason why is because we've already seen, I know it's preseason basketball heading into very early regular season minutes. I get it, all you people on the internet who want to yell at me, but we've already seen enough examples out of the gate with guys who are going to be rotation players and could be rotation players very much so earlier than even I would have anticipated. A great example is someone we were talking about before we got on the air, Yves Missi for the New Orleans Pelicans. I know he kind of has to be a factor out of the gate for a team that doesn't have a regular stand-in center other than Daniel Tice. Like, I understand that aspect of it, but when I did my evaluation last year, you're looking at a guy who had been playing organized basketball since he was 15, 16 years old, right? Yeah. So he didn't have a lot of playing experience out of the gate. He had some up and down moments at Baylor, but you see the athleticism, the coordination, what I deemed as defensive potential where he could be arguably the best defender in the entire class. I know there was someone named Alex Sarr who likely took that mantle, and that's why he went number 2. But the potential was there for him. But with these guys who don't have all of these reps and experience before they get to the NBA, how often are those guys actually panning out? And so there's always a little bit of a mystery with some of these players. But again, you see these surprises, some of these prospects prop up all the time to where just because a class may not have that surefire superstar doesn't mean you won't see guys in rotational spots and even starting spots down the road playing for good to great teams in the NBA. So you can't necessarily take that aspect from it. But what I will say about this class is right now I see a number of players at the top who are going to impact this league in great positions right out of the gate and moving forward. There are some interesting names in the middle of the draft, and then there may end up being some depth as you get later in the first round, early in the second round with some guys who ended up returning to school where I had first round to early second round grades on them, but they decided to go back, get a nice NIL check, and now they might be in position to possibly prop up their draft stock even more as we head into 2025, depending on how well this freshman class actually does. Because, Dan, I mean, you know this as much as I do being a sicko, right? Like, not all these freshmen work out in great length in terms of how we project them early in the season as to where they actually end up. There will be a number of these guys who come back for better opportunities. We'll see how the board falls. But I think this draft, I'm not going to come out and say that this is one of the best drafts that we've seen over the last 20 years. I think 2023 would have something to say about that. I think 2021, 2018 would have something to say about that. I don't know if this class is going to be on the level of them, but the star power at the top, if we're just evaluating the top 5 potential picks preseason as it stands now, could absolutely stand up to some of those classes that we can talk about over the last 15, 20 years.
Yeah, you mentioned somebody returning, for NIL money and improving their draft stock, and all I could hear in the back of my head was like John Cena. That sounds like just full on. That sounds like Alex Caravan's music. Like that's all I could hear. Just like okay.
One of my favorite prospects in this draft class period. We can talk about him later for sure.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, let's not bury the lead. Yeah, I'm gonna go on a very, very, very heavy limb and assume that you do have Cooper Flagg number 1 on your board.
I have Cooper Flagg number 1 on my preseason board. By the way, I hate preseason rankings. I don't like to do preseason boards. Don't ask me to make a big board before January, but because the people love it and we have to do it, yes, Cooper
content, baby.
100%. Got to milk the cow when you got it. So yeah, Cooper Flagg number 1. Listen, this guy is, and I know everyone said it, but it bears repeating. He is one of the ultimate competitors that I've evaluated as a prospect. Like, we look at players who have up and down high school careers in terms of the amount of effort that they actually give on a game to game basis. You hear some of that rumblings behind the scenes from scouts before you head into a year. You're not going to hear any of that about Cooper Flagg. And it doesn't matter whether his team's up by 5, up by 10, up by 30. He's still playing as hard as he possibly can over the course of that game. And that is an underrated trait to find in a young player.
It's a skill.
Because let's be honest, it is a skill, because let's be honest, right? Like if you're a top shelf guy, you have great teammates around you. You're going to one of these powerhouse prep schools. Your team's up by 30, 35, 40 points. There are definitely moments in time where a prospect can get a little bored out there, become a little complacent, whatever the case may be. You don't see that with Cooper. And when you have that type of drive motor on top of everything he brings to the table from a skills perspective, it's very hard to look at that guy and say, if he's checking all of these boxes and he's 6'9" and he's the type of athlete that NBA teams covet, it's very hard to look at him and say he's not going to be the number one pick when all is said and done, unless something catastrophic were to happen.
On Cooper, I've seen, this is the bugaboo in the closet. I've seen the negative takes of, I don't think you can run your offense through him. I don't think he can be your number one. I don't think, he can be your lead guy on a team offensively. When you look at his game, what are the limitations and how real are they or aren't they?
I mean, sure, there's going to be a potential limitation, something to monitor with his shot from a set shot standpoint, right? Like a catch and shoot look or like a spot up look. But everything this guy does off the dribble, his ball handling, his ability to create, post up somebody, fade away, pass to open guys on the move. I hear a lot of those criticisms and I go, I don't think I'm watching the same game tape as everyone else, because I do see that type of number one option. He's a very rare player in terms of, I don't have a great comparison for him, like in terms of like an NBA player comp. There's some names that you can throw around that I'm sure some others have, like, I've used the combination in the past of someone published a quote of mine of a Gordon Hayward, Andre Karolinko combination, which, granted, if we're talking about a number one offensive upside, that may not excite anyone, because Gordon Hayward once upon a time was like a top 5 small forward in the NBA, but he wasn't someone who's going to be the number one guy to go win you a championship. He was a very nice piece to have. But even if Cooper doesn't live up to that type of offensive billing, the type of complementary piece he would be as a number 2 option, like he could absolutely be the best number 2 option in the NBA, bar none. And that's the type of ceiling that he has, whether he's 1A, 1B, 2A. I know that I'm getting something that's going to work in the NBA in Cooper Flagg. And why am I going to pass that up, especially if some of the guys behind him have more theoretical cases in the potential 1A department than with Cooper, whether he's a 1A or a 2A.
This is a question that I've asked multiple evaluators, executives. Have you evaluated a prospect like Cooper in the sense of a guy that can be a 1A that needs the ball less than him?
That's a great question. That's Danny. That's a brain. You're giving me a brain bender. It's early afternoon here. Jeez, man. No, that's kind of why I come back to why I don't have a clean comparison for him. Like I haven't evaluated a prospect quite like him who, we haven't seen him be a traditional 1A, because we've seen plenty of his high school games where he is very comfortable, playing second fiddle or third fiddle and kind of just doing his thing defensively, making plays, getting everyone else involved and kind of taking a back seat in the scoring department. But then you watch like their scrimmage exhibition game the other day, and you watch him, first bucket out of the gate is him in the post, fadeaway shot over a long defender, and you go, oh man, this guy does have a little bit to him in terms of scoring chops. So again, I buy everything he's going to do off the bounce, but I do want to monitor the catch and shoot shot, because I do think it's important nowadays for NBA guys, even if they are number one options, you still have to, at the end of the day, play a complementary role, right? Like you're gonna get others involved. You're gonna play alongside a point guard. You're gonna play alongside a wing who deserves his amount of touches, and you have to be able to either catch, rip, and you're unstoppable, get into the basket, or you have to be enough of a catch and shoot threat to actually continue to pull the defense out and really have them respect that shot. So that's something I'll be monitoring at Duke. But these other concerns about his ball handling, his passing vision, his passing willingness, his ability to get a bucket inside, his ability to pull up from the mid range, create out of the post. I don't have those concerns as some other evaluators might. I think we're going to see a very dominant season from Cooper Flagg at Duke.
This is where there's the decision tree changes for multiple people. Once you get past Cooper, and it's I don't know how you have these guys necessarily tiered going into the season. I have personally I have Cooper ahead of everyone else by a shred. This isn't Wemby where there's a Z tier and then everybody else kind of falls in line. I feel like Cooper's a tier above right now with room for other guys to get into that. So where do you kind of go after Cooper and kind of thinking Portland centric? Who can be most impactful if things break the right way?
Well, so number two for me, and I think for a lot of scouts, would be Ace Bailey coming out of Rutgers, although I think Dylan Harper has a very strong case for the number two spot. And I know we're going to talk about him in a little bit, but if we're circling back around to Ace, especially when it comes to a Trailblazer standpoint, I mean, you and I were talking about it, right? Like this Trailblazers team is deep at nearly every position on the floor, to be perfectly honest, in terms of NBA level talent. And so you have some set positions with guys who you think are going to be there long term in the future. Like you have Scoot Henderson, you have Shaden Sharp, you just brought in Donovan Clingan. That 3-4 spot is really interesting in the sense of you have a number of guys taking over roles already who can either start for you or can come off the bench and give you a good 10, 12, 14, 16 minutes a night. So it's finding that middle ground of, if you are going to take a player in one of those positions, because it's kind of your objective is to build out around some of the more established long-term talent you have, that player better be really freaking good to actually take over that spot in the starting lineup and beat out some of these guys for minutes. And Ace Bailey is that type of player who I have more question marks about Ace Bailey as a prospect than I do Cooper Flagg. Like I have Cooper number one because I do believe he's in a tier by himself right now. But if we're just talking about question marks, I do have some real concerns about Ace Bailey's game from a processing standpoint, in the sense of if the defense throws something different at you, if they double you out of the corner, if they put you in this specific position, if you can't get a shot up, which I mean, this guy shoots like he can get a shot up over anyone. If to some extent he can, he's 6'10", he's able to get that puppy up there. But if the defense puts you in a position to where you have to make another pass or another read to keep things moving, can you do it? I've seen him do it on occasion. I've also seen some very ugly turnovers out of double teams. So I think a lot of that decision making and processing, some of that ball handling, can he get out of some of those traps by himself? I think a lot of those questions still have to be answered. But as a pure per minute lights out shooter and scorer, this guy's in a tier of his own in his own way in this type of draft class. So again, 6'10", big wing. I trust his shot off the catch. I trust his shot off the move. I think he can absolutely get downhill. He can play out of the dunker spot. There's a lot of different ways in which you can use Ace as an offensive option. He's just not the type of all-encompassing wing who you're going to put the ball in his hands and he's going to make every single decision for you. He's not an engine by any means, but he is a potentially very, very, very awesome complementary player, which if he does answer some of those questions I alluded to earlier, he could have the type of very high ceiling. And I guess my best comparison for him right now, he's probably the closest thing we've seen to a pre-injury high school Michael Porter Jr. prospect. And for those who don't remember how good Michael Porter Jr. was in high school, he was one of the best prospects on the wing that I've evaluated, period.
If I remember right, didn't he shoot like 70% his senior year?
His run, not just in high school, but really with a lot of the AAU stuff when he was with Trae Young, a lot of that stuff was just absolutely sicko. Yeah. Like I don't care who you are. I'm going to get a bucket anytime, any place, anywhere, because he was 6'10 and he could not only shoot over you, but he had the type of handle to actually be able to rock guys to sleep, step back, and then pull up. I think Ace Bailey's got some of that in this game too. I just worry not necessarily about him moving backward when he's creating some of those looks, but how does he process what's in front of him when he actually moves forward off the bounce? Those are some of the things, some of the questions I want Ace Bailey to answer. But I will say about Ace, I watched that Rutgers scrimmage the other night against St. John's. And the thing that impressed me the most about him, everyone was going off on social media about how much he scored and the types of shots he was able to make. His defense was impressive. And another one of the guys over at No Ceilings, Corey Tulaba, has been raving about his defense and what he's seen on a lot of the high school tape he's watched back. If Ace Bailey is an engaged defender around the basket, is an engaged secondary rim protector, is someone who can give guys fits out on the perimeter defensively, if he's locked in and engaged on that end for however many minutes a night he's playing in college, that could change his trajectory as a prospect. Because if you're not just giving me buckets on one end, you're also able to get stops and close out possessions on the other. That is literally what every NBA team wants on the wing, is someone that size who can actually do those things against real 6'7", 6'8", 6'9" sized NBA wings.
These are obviously, I think, the two guys that not just where Portland wants to be, stylistically, they both make a ton of sense. Roster fit, they both make a ton of sense. They could slot into kind of what they have going. You mentioned Scoot and Shaden and Donovan, but also Denny, I think, in that vein. This is, as of right now, before we play the season, this feels like the best case scenario when you're talking about these guys. And folks, the reason why I'm doing this is not so you can hear about just Cooper Flagg and Ace Bailey, but get a sense of the prospects, but also where they're at. Okay, you've got Cooper Flagg at Duke. You've got Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper, both at Rutgers. By the way, February 16th down at Matthew Knight Arena, they play the Ducks. I will be there.
Without question.
Yeah, I will be there. I wanted to go to the Illinois game and see Kasparis and Will Riley, but they play the same night. The Blazers play the Lakers. Can't do that one. Nope. But we've mentioned these two guys, and the reason I'm doing this as a primer of like, this is where we stand today, October 26th. Things will change, and it's not necessarily that Cooper Ace will necessarily not be 1-2, but this is, I remember this time last year, let's play a game called Name a Kentucky Prospect that was a top 3 pick that ended up not in the first round last year. Poor Justin Edwards. But things can change drastically. But I'm saying this is, hey, look, you want to know what's coming down the pipe and what to be excited about with your Blazers going forward? Get unrationally attached to players that will never, ever, ever be on the team. And then when they don't draft them, be very mad about it. That is how the draft process works. This is meant to go. I want you to like watch North Carolina and be like, Drake Powell is the next great North Carolina project, and if the Blazers don't take him, they miss the draft. Like that's the fun of when your team is in a rebuild process, is diving into everything else, because what ends up happening is you end up becoming not only just fans of, your own team, but they end up going and playing for other teams, and you have lots of adult sons around the NBA. And on the nights the Blazers aren't playing, you go, you know what? I am going to go watch Liam McNeely play for the Hornets. And you go, yeah, I really liked him. Let's see what he's doing right now. And you start doing that, and then you find yourself, like me, watching Mark Williams going, can you just stay healthy, big man? Can you please just stay healthy? I want good things for you. I want it. But no, we set this up now so that it pays off in June, and then for the next few years, as you watch guys and you tell your friends you were right about this guy that you saw back in November of 2024. So
that was an incredible soliloquy about what it actually means to be a basketball fan and not just a fan of your own personal hometown team. And by the way, if you want more coverage about not just those young guys while they're in college, obviously coming up for the draft, but while they're in the NBA, there's no better place to be than No Ceilings.
Exactly.
The NBA Project is covering quite literally all of that stuff. So
plug away.
Yeah.
You guys got a hell of a team over there. I've told Corey and the Tylers and everyone else that anytime you guys want, I'm more than happy to have you guys on. So plug away. And I'm serious, guys. If you guys want great coverage, head over to No Ceilings and you will get covered with everything that you want and need. And then you pester them about a big board because they didn't update it once. So it's like, come on, guys, the link doesn't work. I'm sure you guys haven't heard that at all, not once.
Oh boy, listen. If everyone wants big boards and mock drafts and sicko content,
Yeah.
you're gonna get it. It's gonna be out there in preseason full fashion. It's coming very very soon. Trust me. And I'm gonna look at the board and I'm gonna want to burn it down and hate it because it's like whose line is it anyway? The points don't matter until we actually watch these guys play real games. So
there's a little behind the scenes. One thing that I'm doing is I am doing my big board, but what I'm gonna do is end up tracking it every time I update it. And just, I'll have players on a chart and just have a static line of where they end up going when I make my adjustments, and then kind of see just where it all ends up, just so I can actually track the thought process behind everything and go, how did I get here? And it's not going to make any sense to anybody but me. But then I'll go, okay, need to be better about this.
What I will say though about preseason rankings before we pivot to who we're going to talk about next. Just one more small plug for No Ceilings. What I will say, the team is incredibly invested at trying their absolute darndest to get as much right as possible before the season starts. Like when I say that the team that I'm on cares very deeply about watching the high school tape and the grainy overseas tape to try and figure out who these guys are before the season starts to get names on the board. Trust me, heavily invested. So when things go wrong, you can at least know that the homework was done and it was done and handled with care. Some things just don't work out the way that we want them to or the way we see them happening. But that's the fun about basketball is everything can change in an instant. And out of thin air, we get a brand new storyline or a brand new player to talk about. So that's what's beautiful about basketball.
Absolutely. All right. Cooper 1, Ace 2. Where do we go from here?
We go to Dylan Harper next, who, again, I said that it's going to be a close race for number 2 on my board between Ace and Dylan, because we've seen enough guys come into the NBA where they may have some certain questions about, how great of an athlete are they? Where do they actually rank on the percentile scale of NBA athletes? Or where do they actually rank from a shooting standpoint or a pure scoring standpoint, or how's this guy's going to hold up in certain matchups defensively? But we've seen enough of these cases where those questions sort of not fade into the abyss completely, but they're silenced a little bit by just how much this guy actually understands what's going on in the court and how he's able to see things 1-2 steps ahead and actually impact the game from that standpoint. And that's what you're getting in a big guard like Dylan Harper, right? 6'6", 6'7", big-bodied guard who can create for himself and others in pick and roll. He's got the type of dribble craft and creativity to bait defenders and get them to bite at all the wrong times to create some of those extra windows you see some of these bigger guards in the NBA able to do. I'm not putting him on the level of like a LaMelo or a Luka. Those are special prospects. But like just that type of creativity, keep that in mind when you're watching Dylan Harper at Rutgers this year. He's very strong. He uses his body well to get downhill and finish through contact at tough angles. So you're painting the picture of a guy who knows how to operate in the pick and roll, right? Knows how to make the most when he gets to certain spots in the mid-range and by the basket. He can find the extra man. He can hit the lob guy. He's got awesome touch on all of his passes. The shooting is the biggest thing that you come back to Dylan and you're going to have question marks about, because he has not been an outstanding shooter pre-college at other high school and AAU levels. But when the shot's on, it looks good. He's a lefty. Love watching lefty shooting strokes. The shot looks fundamental. It does not look broken by any means. It looks good. And if he becomes, like a 35, 36+% three-point shooter off the bounce, I mean, you put together all the other parts of his game, and that's what star guards are made of in the NBA today, baby. Like that's exactly what NBA teams are looking for. And I just think he's going to do so much. Ace is obviously going to handle the majority of the scoring burden at Rutgers.
Yeah.
But I think Dylan's going to do so much everywhere else in terms of actually lifting the team up and making everyone else around him better, to the point where if Rutgers does have one of those special seasons, maybe they don't win the title, maybe they don't get to like the Sweet 16, but maybe they outperform expectations to what we've known them to be at Rutgers over the last few seasons. And you could point to Dylan Harper and go, that guy's the reason why. If he's able to lift up the talent around him at this level and look spectacular while doing it and prove that he can play next to a complimentary star who is the level of prospect, if not better, than he is in Ace Bailey, and he's able to do these things, that's exactly what you have to be able to do in the NBA. Like, context is everything in college, and context can be used in bad ways, but it can also be used in good ways in terms of getting your evaluation right. Like, if a player isn't around the type of talent that you would expect to see at a Duke, for example, and the guys at like a mid-major school or maybe like a lower Power 4 school, guess what? That's also going to be the case in the NBA too. Like, if you're a top potential pick, you're going to be on a team who hasn't been able to rack up wins and sign free agent X and trade for star player Y. And you're going to kind of have to make things work and figure them out as you go. And if you can't do that in college and you don't project to be able to do that from what we've seen on tape, why am I going to buy into you the same way as some of these other prospects with a top 5, top 10, whatever pick at the NBA level? And so I do think it's important for Dylan to be able to show those characteristics this year at Rutgers, but I'm fully buying into how he's going to do it and the fact that he's going to do it at all periods. So that's why he's number 3 on my board right now, could compete at number 2 with Ace.
The question obviously that gets thrown around with Dylan is he's not Russell Westbrook. He's not John Morant. He's not the bursty athlete, despite him having the build and being bigger than all of those guys. He's a different type of guard in that sense. Definitely looks like dad. Definitely got the genetics of I put on muscle. But so much of the NBA right now, with again, unless you're highlighting a guy like Luka, who pound for pound might legitimately be the strongest guy in the league, everyone else has some level of athletic burst that gets associated with their development. Now, Luka's acceleration and deceleration is otherworldly, but his is it's a different type. And Dylan's not that. So the evaluation question becomes: can he run a team being a below the rim, more off cadence guy? And again, kind of what's your general philosophy on those kind of players in general? Of if you don't have necessarily the athletic markers of the top 1% NBA athlete types.
So he's not that, but I do think he's a better athlete than he's getting credit for. Mm-hmm. And in a league where most of everything is being done out of a high ball screen or a handoff action with a 7+ footer who's strong and can actually set a good screen, I'm not as concerned about will Dylan Harper actually be able to get downhill and generate paint touches. I think he's going to be perfectly fine at generating paint touches. And so what happens when you actually get in the paint, you need to be able to see what's going on around you and either make the right decision to kick the ball back out or take advantage of the space that's in front of you and be able to hit that floater or mid-range pull-up jump shot. Or you need to be able to keep somebody on your hip and wait and bait somebody, and then ultimately someone's able to cut over from the baseline or the corner or whatever the case may be, set up from the dunker spot, and you need to be able to kind of hit that pass like I talked about. Like, Dylan can do all of those things for you. On top of, he's a below-the-rim guy, but he can also finish through contact. Mm-hmm. It's not the same as talking about like a 6'2" point guard who, yeah, he might be like 190 pounds, but he just doesn't take angles well, or he's not able to actually finish over the trees or finish through some of those guys. Like Dylan's 6'6", 6'7", 200+ pounds already. Yeah. Is probably going to get even bigger, although he looks good coming into this year. Like he looks like he's put on some good lean muscle mass. Mm-hmm. and kind of slimmed down in certain areas, maybe taking care of some of the baby fat. Like he looks good, and I fully expect him physically to hold up at the NBA level. He may not be the burstiest of guys, but again, when you're operating at so many of these types of actions to where it's not always just about getting a step on someone in isolation, all of a sudden things open up for you. And he does have that type of vision processing speed to where he can kind of pick apart defenses and dictate what goes to the next pass, the next possession.
He has the necessary craft to take advantage
Correct.
of what he's working with. All right. I think for most part, that's some version of that is the consensus top 3 right now. And I've seen some folks that I was talking to the other day that have VJ a little bit higher. Nolan a little bit higher, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a second. So, but this is if you're evaluating college basketball, number one, ESPN's going to shove it down your throat. You're going to see a lot of Rutgers and a lot of Duke, and rightfully so. Quick side note: college basketball is back. Enjoy it. Last year was a not great year for if you're talking about evaluating players in college basketball. It was not the most exciting thing. This year, you're gonna have 20 guys on any given night. You're like, I want to see what this guy looks like. So, which again starts in a week. Yeah, was it November 4th?
Week and a half.
So,
yeah.
It's here, which is again why we're doing this now. All right, we got those three out of the way. Where do you go next in this? Like, here's who to watch in the early season in this top group.
So next, I would go VJ Edgecombe out of Baylor. I would go VJ number 4. Although if I'm trying to pick apart out of this top 5 who I may potentially be the most concerned about long term, VJ may very well be that answer, and it has nothing to do with his motor, his nastiness, his competitiveness. I mean, you watched high school AAU tape of this guy. I've talked to multiple people who have been in the gym when he's done workouts and done preparation. They say like this guy is top-notch focused, top-notch skilled as a competitor. Nothing to do with that. Obviously has the athletic tools you want, has the length that you want from somebody playing off the ball defensively. I do have some questions though about his ball handling and his guard skills, because you see anywhere some places have him listed at like 6'5", 6'6". I haven't seen him in person, but I've heard from enough people who have. He's not that tall.
He's not. He's 6'4".
He's 6'3", 6'4". Yeah. We'll have to see how he measures out at the combine, but you're talking about someone who's likely better at the 2 than the 3. And if you're a shooting guard in today's NBA, you have to have those kind of combo skills to be able to cross over with whatever your point guard's doing. Mm-hmm. You have to. Otherwise, why am I going to play? If VJ Edgecombe is simply an off-ball guy at 6'3", and he doesn't have some of that creativity you see in some of the starting guards in the NBA who are combos, or some of the guys who immediately come off the bench like a Malik Monk, like if you don't have some of those ball skills and you're purely an off-ball wing, why am I going to play you specifically over someone who is 4 or 5 inches taller than you, can also shoot the 3 ball, can also cut to the basket, and I'm very sold on him defending multiple positions at the NBA level? Those are the questions that VJ has to answer, because if he doesn't improve his ball handling, if he doesn't improve finishing with his offhand, if he doesn't improve his vision as a passer, things can come together for him even in the shooting department of, oh, this guy's a reliable catch and shoot shooter. But some of those other questions are really going to bog down what his case is in terms of actually starting at that type of position in the NBA. Because, Danny, I'm sure you talk about it all the time with evaluating the Trailblazers and some of these other young NBA teams, but the talent in this league is too deep at this point.
Yeah.
If you can't do what the team expects you to do, that is one reason why expansion's coming. But if you can't do what this team is asking you to do, there is somebody behind you who is bigger, stronger, and likely better than you who will take that job from you, period, point blank, end of story. And so I think VJ is going to do everything in his power this season to excel at Baylor. I think he's going to get plenty of touches. I think he's going to get plenty of shots. I think he's going to guard a whole bunch of different positions. I don't have concerns about him from that standpoint, but when you actually break down what goes beyond this initial layer of ooh and ah, I do have some question marks about that. And that's why if he doesn't answer those, he could be the guy in this top 5 group who I see sliding down into that back half of the lottery or whatever the case may be.
Two-parter in that one, more statement than anything else. I think him going to Baylor and playing for Drew is maybe the best possible matchup in the country for a player and coach, which is why I'm very interested to watch what happens to him at Baylor. The actual question is, on some of the concerns that you had, did any at all of his tape with the Bahamas maybe sway you a little bit as far as what he could or couldn't be capable of as a lead guard?
Well, that's the tape that kept him at 4 for me, because he was able to produce in those professional settings. He was arguably one of the more reliable players on that Bahamas team, which features scorers like a Buddy Hield who have way more experience actually getting those types of shots up. And VJ was relentless on defense. He was a transition nightmare. You saw some of the dunks he was throwing down. Like, that is the stuff that gets you very excited about his game, because he has all of this potential. But again, it's, Buddy Hield is a guy who plays strictly off the ball at the NBA level, but he's also one of the best shooters we've seen come into the league, period.
Ever.
Like, is VJ going?
Yes. Portland fans are very well aware, because he came in off the bench Wednesday night and absolutely fried them. And it was like oh, yeah, he's a pretty good Clay replacement in that vein.
Does VJ project to be that type of shooter? No. Probably not. No. Is VJ's cutting ability going to be that top percentile to where he's able to generate easy buckets that way? Is he going to be that nasty of a transition scorer? I mean, you can put some of these pieces together as to how he's going to produce points in the NBA. But again, a lot of it comes back to, look, this guy's going to have to get downhill. He's going to be run off of a spot, and he's going to have to make those next decisions. He's going to be able to get to certain spots at the NBA level against defenders who are bigger, longer, quicker than him. And I think he does have to answer some of those questions for me at Baylor. If he does, then 4 probably sounds about right for his draft stock. Like, I think there's a very real possibility where he ends up 4 somewhere on draft night. But if you're looking at him to be the type of guard who's going to carry more of your offense and take over, I'm not sure he's that type of player. He is much more so a complementary piece. But if he is as good defensively, as we've seen already on tape and in highlights, like, if he is that type of defender, that will carry his evaluation, because look at how many freaking threes are being bombed in the NBA nowadays, and how many of these guys getting these wide open looks because there aren't enough defenders on the floor who are actually athletic and quick enough to get to some of these spots and contest these shots, or, hard close out and force these guys to come up in other areas of the floor to where a defender can rotate over. You actually contest a shot. Like, VJ can be one of those defenders for you. It's just, can he actually carry the other side of the water pail offensively, carry that side of the load to where you're able to look at him as a comfortable top 5 pick.
The comp that I have used for him is early development Victor Oladipo.
Okay.
In the sense of when the handle was a little wild, got a little outside his body, maybe a little inconsistent, but when those nights he put it together, you went, oh, okay. And then obviously as the season progressed at Indiana, he looked a lot better.
No, for those who haven't or don't remember very early college career Victor Oladipo, trust me, he did not look like the Victor Oladipo that we remembered on his best nights later in Indiana or in the NBA. So,
but that's kind of the trajectory. I'm like, if things come together, that's the path at least that I see for him.
Right.
Where it's like, look, if the good stuff is good, you could have some of the guard skill stuff and be a guy with, because as we kind of talked about there, his athleticism is insane. Like, for all of the, tying this back to Portland, for all of the, Scoot Henderson's a 1% athlete. We had to kind of downplay that. It's like, Scoot's a very good athlete. He's not. VJ's a step above Scoot as an athlete. He 1 foot, 2 foot, with a runway, without a runway. I watched him at Hoop Summit, and I watched him from a dead stop rise up and pack, and I went, oh, okay, why does a 6'4" guard have, the ability to rise up over a big and throw something down from the dunker's spot without moving? It's like he's different in that vein, and he knows his athleticism translates. I think
there's a difference between just being a pure run jump athlete versus being a very functional athlete on the basketball court, and VJ is absolutely skewed towards he is a very functional athlete in multiple situations. Not just, I can go up and throw down a flashy dunk in transition, or maybe occasionally put somebody on a poster, which, as you alluded to, he very well do. But it is also very functional on the defensive end, to where, like, Baylor's defensive system is very chaotic, very, very, very much so havoc. And I think VJ is going to get a lot of run-out opportunities off of the deflections and things he's going to cause. And there's going to be some highlight plays at Baylor for sure to make people excited.
All right, so that's where you go with the 4. Who's at spot number 5, and what precarious position do they find themselves in?
Nolan Traore is at 5, playing overseas for St. Quentin right now. Very exciting French guard who I think a lot of draft sickos would have loved for him to be able to play minutes for France in the Olympic run, but I think that was just a little too early for Nolan. I think he will definitely be there next Olympics. He will be very much so on a national stage for France alongside Victor Wembanyama and
That
Bilal
2028
Coulibaly.
team is going to be so unbelievable. If they're not favored in 2028 in LA, as insane as it sounds, I will be surprised.
I mean, we almost watched Victor Wembanyama beat the U.S. by himself. We almost saw that happen, except Steph Curry was like, "No, not today, friends." So yeah. I got one more incredible performance in me. So, but Nolan will definitely be there. He is on the rise as one of France's best prospects. Speedy, electric 6'4" point guard. He thrives on downhill pressure to create looks for himself and his opponents. When I say, like, sometimes we use the phrase a blur in the court, and it's not quite to that level, but when I say that Nolan is a blur, he quite literally is a blur.
It's John
I've
Wall.
seen
it's breakneck, fastest in the league with the ball type speed.
You can find plays on YouTube in 10 seconds where he is from the 3-point line to the rim in like a second, and you're like, what did I just watch? Like that's the type of speed that he has, which is kind of what he needs, because he's not a big guard, he's not a stocky guard, he's not someone who's 6'6" with size and length. He's about 6'4", and listen, he is good. He can create something out of nothing quick and in a hurry. He can certainly score out of isolation by just being able to blow by everyone in front of him. He can find guys at the next level of the defense. He can create his own shot from the mid-range. Like, there is a lot to like about Nolan's game. The biggest question mark, again, it's a common thread. You're going to hear the word shooting a lot when you do draft evaluation, but he has not been an efficient shooter at any level overseas, both in a youth system as well as in FIBA competition. Except this year, he actually is hitting 36% of his three-point looks so far, which is great. And what I will say about the shooting is we've skewed much more towards not necessarily caring and putting everything into the raw makes, but the volume and the willingness in terms of shooting. And every single season that you can look at of Nolan's on Real GM that they've stat tracked, he's averaged like 5 to 6 3-point attempts, per game. So he is a very willing shooter. The results from the free throw line haven't bore themselves out. Again, we can talk about the efficiency in terms of the raw makes and misses, but he is at least a willing shooter and scorer. And when he has the bright lights on for him, you will see those 25, 27, 29-point nights to where this guy just flat out takes over a game. So the more that he's able to make outside shots and leverage those makes into easier drives to where the defense has to react much quicker than they normally would for a lot of other guards, the more defenders he's able to displace, the more open shots he's going to be able to create for others. All of what we want him to be is going to be wrapped up into that jump shot, but he brings nearly everything else we want him to the table, from a guy who can set the table for others, has enough on his plate to be able to carry for himself, and really be the type of next level guard that we want him to be. Because you and I were talking about before the show, Danny, but he has to be special as a guard at 6'4" to be taken in the top 5 of the draft. That is just where we are in the NBA today. That is no slander towards smaller guards. Trust me, I am a small guard appreciator. But if you're going to be taking that high, like we have seen, you can talk about with Portland. We talked enough off air about Scoot Henderson and some of the highlights and some of the misses that he's already shown in his young career. But I consider Scoot Henderson to have been a better pro prospect coming in than I do Nolan Traore as it stands today. Maybe for one reason or another, that evaluation could flip in the favor of Nolan as we go deeper into this draft evaluation season. I will not rule that and take that off the table. But as it stands right now, I was way higher on Scoot. And you even said to me, like, the number of guys who have actually come into the NBA as a teenage point guard and found legitimate success very early out of the gate, it's a handful or less of guys. Like it just doesn't happen very often. And so I will be curious to see through my continued evaluation, do I believe Nolan can be that type of guy? Or do I see him at a level of, maybe if I'm getting him at like pick 7 or pick 8, I feel way more comfortable than like if his stock all of a sudden bubbles up into like the top 3 or the top 4, even if it stays at 5. Like where am I going to feel comfortable about picking a player of his archetype?
Right, and I think that's the kind of question when you're talking about with the guards. And interesting point on Nolan, VJ Edgecombe at Hoop Summit. It stands out because he's such a freak athlete. He said about Nolan Traore, he's the fastest player I've ever played with.
There you go.
He also called him the best point guard he's ever played with. So again, young guys, but these guys all play in high level, high leverage international competitions. Like he's got some followers or some supporters within his own draft class. It's pretty impressive. Nolan, I'm assuming, is he the only guy in your top 8 that's not in college this year?
That would be correct.
Okay. So then I wanted to kind of highlight that because so much of last year's class had the international flavor. And I think for general fans not being able to see guys play throughout the year and kind of be reduced to the YouTube mixtape redux of, boy, does everybody look good on those. You can actually sit back and you can evaluate these guys. Like if you're a fan and you want to have a better understanding, you can go watch. Most of these guys are going to end up playing at some of the top programs in the country this year, and you'll have access and visibility to these guys. It's going to make it a little bit different, I think, as far as the perception and the noise around this particular class. Okay, so that's just a little note. That's your top 5. Cooper, Ace, Dylan, VJ, Nolan, which I have the same top 5. Mine is, I think the only difference is I have Dylan and Ace reversed. Yeah, that's all I got. So we're in the exact same boat. Where do you go after this? Because this is, I think the general consensus is that's the top 5 right now. There's a couple guys that might slide in at 5, but the list from 6 through I think 12 for most people is so different across the board, and it's always really interesting after this spot.
So in no particular order of supreme confidence, because it's preseason. I have Kaman Maluach from Duke. I have Drake Powell out of North Carolina, and probably the guy who will be the biggest boom or bust prospect for me preseason in terms of where does he stay where he's at would be Igor Demen out of BYU.
Yep.
So we can go whichever direction you want to go out of those 3 guys, but that's my 6 through 8.
I want to go crazy right out of the gate because Igor is one of the most interesting prospects I think in the country. Very, very large, very skilled. Just how well does it translate?
He is the most, I have this in my notes, the most theoretical player near the top of my board in terms of what we may or may not see from him in college early at BYU. Because, listen, any of these big wing guys that you can evaluate, NBA teams, fans of the draft, they're already drooling. Whenever you say the words big wing, we're locked in. Like, what are you going to say next? I hope you say the thing that I want you to say next. They're locked in. He is a creator. He is a triple-double threat when the full package comes together. He's that type of bouncy athlete who will throw it down ahead of the pack in transition. He's got the ball handling to get out in the open court, make plays for himself, make plays for others. A very willing scorer and shooter. He just has not been efficient virtually anywhere that he's played. He is quite literally the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. But the flashes have been there in terms of his half-court creativity with the ball in his hands. And NBA teams, they always need more guys with plus size and length who aren't afraid to handle the ball in secondary actions, can attack closeouts, and find the open man if the shot isn't there. And Igor has had flashes of doing all of those things. There is a very, very high ceiling for his draft stock. Like the end to this discussion in June could be Igor went higher than 8. It could also be that he wasn't in the draft at all. If he is still terribly inefficient at BYU and scouts and executives gives him the feedback of, why don't you stay for another year in college? Why don't you further develop? Maybe you can even find another situation for you. We don't know what the future holds for you, but find another situation for a second year to where you can actually develop, round out some of these skills. You become a more efficient player. And then we're right back to looking at you with a lottery grade in the 2026 draft. Like we don't know how this story is going to end, but not everyone in this draft also has the upside of him. Like I know some people who have him in a range that I do. I know some people who have him in the late teens. I know some people who have him in the 20s. It is incredibly wide of a draft range right now for him. I'm going to stake a non-confident claim here and have him at number 8 and hope that that case ultimately bears itself out because I want guys like him to succeed. But
to be fair, it's exactly where I have him. I have him 8th.
If I got to pull back the reins a little bit, I also won't be afraid to do so. And I've become a much harsher critic and evaluator over recent years. I expect a lot more from prospects, and it's not that I don't think guy A or guy B isn't going to succeed. I just know the bar that they have to hit to play at the NBA level. And so when I see some of these things, the volume, the confidence, the willingness, that's all great. That's all great. And we've seen some instances where the volume and the efficiency haven't perfectly been lined up. And we've seen some of those instances work out, but we've seen some of those instances to where it hasn't worked out and those paths have still continued to divert. And those players ultimately end up on second, third, fourth teams. And good luck. We'll see if you end up making it in the NBA. So his story will be the most fascinating to track for me out of this preseason top 8 group.
Another name you mentioned in there was Drake Powell. I've got him as 6th on my board right now. What is it about Drake Powell that intrigues you or entices you? And is he one of those guys that you can maybe see rise up and be in the conversation above where you kind of have him at now?
He's going to be in competition with VJ Edgecombe in terms of top shooting guard on the board, at least as it looks for me right now preseason, because what I project VJ to be as a defender at Baylor, I think there's a chance Drake Powell becomes an even better version of that as an on-ball guy. I think his stance, his fundamentals, his processing on that side's just a little bit better than VJ's. I think Drake Powell's a bigger guard. He's about 6'6", so he has a better chance to actually scale up and defend some of those bigger wing matchups in the NBA than I would project somebody like VJ too. He isn't a natural creator either, though. He can get his own shot some in the half court, but I have questions about how efficient of a shooter he's going to be out of the gate from distance. Is he going to be that 36, 37% guy? Is he going to take every shot that UNC is going to force feed him, or is he going to be a little bit more reserved? Is he going to look to attack first downhill? Does he get himself in some trouble because he isn't the most adept ball handler or secondary read passer? You know, what is his on-ball case going to look like in a similar way to VJ's? But I have VJ ranked ahead of Drake now because I'm just banking on VJ's pure athleticism to ultimately carry that evaluation and weight it greater right now than Drake. But I do think Drake is a little bit bigger, and I think his fundamentals right now are just a little bit better than VJ's. So I have Drake at 6, but that doesn't mean that he can't rise higher than that, especially if he does end up being a better shooter out of the gate than I'm rating him. Because if he does, that's the type of 3-and-D player that every NBA team wants, and that's the type of guy that they will gravitate towards in the draft.
Apologies, my headset keeps resetting, and I don't know why. It keeps giving me a weird beep and then saying, screw you, it's not going to work. Why? You are plugged in, sir. Why are you doing this? Maybe now. Okay, there we go. I don't know why it wants to do this. I love the worlds of technology. You there?
100%.
There we go. All right. Who are, as we kind of wrap things up here, who are some guys you could see sneaking up? Not even sneaking up. Who are some guys that you could see that aren't there right now that you went, yeah, I can see them being towards the top as we get to draft day?
Con Canoople's been certainly the biggest what the heck is this guy going to be in college? Because if he's as good as some of the tape says that he is in college, and you know, some of the athletic concerns don't actually bear themselves out, he is able to create his own shot, he's able to hold up to a certain degree defensively, then where does his draft stock go? Because he just seems to be a special shooter. And again, if you could put enough of those other things together, the NBA needs shooting at a premium. And if you're going to project any of these guys near the top 10, to be someone in the NBA who's launching, 9, 10, 11 threes per 100 right out of the gate, knocking down a good percentage of them, that would definitely be Con Knuppel. Another guy.
Real quick,
Yeah, go ahead.
on Con, with shooting at such a premium, do you find it interesting that it takes so many players a while to develop to a level of shooting that is needed in the NBA, whereas seemingly 2-3 players a draft cycle are legitimately ready to be shooters, and that is their role in the NBA? Do you find that it's strange that the contrast is there, where the development is not quite caught up to, I think, what most people assume it is?
So I think it's twofold. I think for the guys who are very comfortable having the ball in their hands, I think obviously the speed of the game is much different to where they need to read and see different things, and they're not taking as efficient of shots as they probably could be in college, just based on the level of competition and level of defender in front of them. For off-ball guys, I think a lot of those players generally are not starting right when they come into the NBA. They're coming off the bench, and they sort of need to find their own rhythm, and they need to figure out what exactly that looks like for them. They may take similar shots in the NBA that they did in college, but the rhythm, the frequency, those things might not be there for them, to where they're sort of out of their rhythm, out of their funk. And so while they're also trying to transition to a deeper line back, they're also just trying to get themselves into the swing of things and figure out how they're going to impact, period. And when can I actually expect to see that shot? Is it going to be my first few trips up the court? Is it going to be right before the coach pulls me out? I'm finally going to get my first shot of the game. Like that rhythm is a lot for players to figure out, especially when they have to transition to being a professional as it is, period. Now, a guy like Dalton Connect is a different story, because, that guy really is one of the most elite of elite shooters. Like I was not bashful when I comped him on Chuck's podcast over at Chucking Darts to JJ Redick. Like I threw that type of a comp out there. I know Chuck wanted to push back on me for a little bit, but like JJ's clearly enamored with this guy. JJ's giving him as glowing compliments as he possibly can for someone like Connect. Mm-hmm. That type of shooter and that type of player, he will be able to transition a little bit differently. We can expect some success out of him. But like to your point, like rookies come in, they only shoot like 30 to 31% on average from three. Yeah. Like it does take some time. I think the answer I gave, it's twofold depending on the type of player.
I just find it interesting, because I think when you do, as an evaluator, see somebody who's very clearly a shooter, like a Dalton, like a Con, like where you're just like, yeah, that guy can shoot the living hell out of the ball. It maybe skews evaluation, both good and bad. And I always find that, those kind of prospects interesting. Is there anybody else in that early group where you're looking at? And again, for those wondering, Con Knuppel, Duke, picking up a trend here. It's like,
here's another blue blood player, someone who you and I have common ground on, Alex Karaban.
Yes, I talked to Coach Hurley about him last week, 2 weeks ago on the radio, and there's a lot of love there for Karaban.
I don't know how high is too high, but every time I talk to someone about their preseason boards, I'm like, yeah, you probably don't have Karaban high enough.
Yeah.
If they're like, I already have him at 14. I already have him at 15. I don't know if that's high enough. I realistically don't know.
Yeah.
If I were the Oklahoma City Thunder last season, I would have drafted him 100%, because I thought that that's the type of player that team 100% needed in terms of front court depth, because he's going to hit the glass hard. He is absolutely a complimentary passer. Mm-hmm. He's the guy who's going to keep the ball, keep the offense moving. He can shoot from distance, and he's
got size.
He's one of the sneakier, better defenders that we have in this entire draft class. So it's like, I get it. He's not going to put up 20 points a game for you. He's not going to be the flashiest guy in the box score. But when you actually watch the tape back and you list off who are actually the most impactful players in college that we can look at for the NBA right now, I thought Karaban was there last draft cycle, and I certainly think he's going to be there this draft cycle. And if I am a good team who needs someone in the front court to plug in right away and give me good minutes, I need to look at Alex Karaban.
I feel like he's going to be this season's Tristan da Silva, where there's a lot of people looking around.
That's a great comp,
in the sense
because
of
he's
like,
an older guy. That's a great comp. Yep.
It's just like he's really good. It's okay to the stigma of older players. Everybody wants to talk about Jaime Jaquez, and it's like, yeah, it's okay to, like, if guys have a skill set and they know their role and they're already shining in that role, the closest thing I can compare to this is with the Blazers is Jabari Walker. Jabari Walker came in day one, knew what his role was going to be, which very, 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 very few rookies understand the game. Now, a big part of that is his father, Samaki Walker, did a very good job of saying, hey, bud, you're not going to be a star, but you can have a 10-year career in the NBA as a role player, so if you understand this the day you get there, you can be significantly more successful. And I feel like guys like De Silva, like Jaquez, like Caravan have higher level skill sets, but they understand and have understood their roles from the jump, which is something I think that in itself is a skill that I don't think a lot of players naturally come to. And those are the guys that, when you're talking about role players, end up being the most successful role players, is they have a great understanding of who they are, and what they're supposed to do from the day they get there.
If you can rebound, defend, shoot threes, and you can actually do all of those things, you will play a very long career in the NBA, and you will probably find yourself drafting closer to the lottery than the back end of the first round.
Yeah. So, well, I kept you for over an hour. I appreciate you, man. At Draft Deeper, Nathan Grubel, No Ceilings. Plug away, pitch away, anything you're working on, anything you got coming up, and we'll get you out of here.
No, Danny, thank you for the time. Thank you for the early season guest spot. Always got to get those reps in.
We got to do it now so we can start building it up and when we come back. That's what
got to build up the podcast conditioning.
Yes.
100%. But yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Draft Deeper. I'm at No Ceilings. I'm doing a lot of work in the space related to the young players in the NBA and in the G League. My project's called Youth Movement NBA, and I'm very passionate about it right now. And a big reason why is I don't just want to talk about what these guys are doing in the NBA. I don't just want to talk about how they're developing and how much better they're getting. I want to be able to tie it back to the draft and the lessons that we can learn, because sometimes as draft scouts, we get way too wrapped up in just watching the college tape or watching the overseas tape and not putting enough stock into what's actually going on in the NBA and the lessons that we can learn from what's happening right now and keeping up with that side of the game as well. And so I kind of want to tie all of those pieces together, talk about the G League a little bit, who can actually earn jobs, who can get a standard contract or a two-way contract in the G League, who are maybe some guys overseas who went undrafted, went to a different spot. Maybe they could come back. So those are a lot of the things that I want to do for No Ceilings this year. And it's something I'm very passionate about. And I've already gotten great feedback on the project, which is excellent. That's what we would want over at No Ceilings, but that's what you can find a lot of my content personally to be focused on this year.
Awesome. Head over to No Ceilings, folks, and subscribe. I do. Full stop. I'm not just telling you to go over there. I pay for the content. If there's content that people make that you want, go pay for it. That's how the world works now. That's why you're here doing this, and you probably subscribe to my Patreon. If you don't, go there, because we'll be doing this stuff. We'll have you back on later in the year.
100%. I'll be there.
My plan right now is kind of like let's do like twice a quarter check-in. I'm gonna rotate some folks through and go, hey, how's this guy doing, and what should Portland fans care about? And then some lunatic from some transfer is going to pop up on a draft board like Dalton Connect and go from some small school to an SEC school, and you go, oh, this Northern Colorado kid is going to be pretty special.
You want an answer to who one of those kids could be?
Oh yeah, give it to me.
Tucker DeVries.
Oh, okay.
He's playing at West Virginia. Yeah. That's in case anyone's not familiar with the Tuck Trains game. Mm-hmm. Go watch some tape, guys. His Drake stuff was very fun.
Yeah. All right, we'll get you out of here on that. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We appreciate you. You can follow me across social media at Danny Marang, at DMarang on Instagram, because there's still a squatter on my handle. You're a monster. Thank you. You complete jackhole. You can email the show at jackramses@gmail.com. You can find me every day, Monday through Friday, noon to 3 with my co-host, Dusty Hara, on 1080 The Fan. And then, obviously, the Jack Ramses Patreon, patreon.com/Jack Ramses for all of the Blazers content. Everyone have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Take care. Like I said, we'll keep the draft stuff and draft preview and college preview stuff coming as we get into the season, because the Portland Trail Blazers currently 0-2. Take on the New Orleans Pelicans tomorrow afternoon, matinee game. And remember, you can catch me on the post-game show on K2. Tomorrow's game is on K2, the main channel. You can catch Joe Simons, myself, and Tyree Smith in the Trailblazers post-game Rip City wrap-up. That'll do it for now. Everybody have a